Welcome to the Debrief. This is your weekly wrap-up of everything happening in public policy and politics. So much going on this week with just a handful of weeks ahead before the November elections. First, I'm Donna King. I'm editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal. Glad you're with us. Plus, today we have CJ's own deputy editor, Jeff Moore, on the couches, and reporter for Carolina Journal, Brianna Kramer, and from the John Locke Foundation, Mitch Kokai. Okay, here's what we're talking about. First of all, RFK's lawsuit to remove him from North Carolina's ballot in November has its day in court. Big news from this morning. We're going to touch on that. Plus, Governor Cooper's brought Janet Yellen to North Carolina to really talk up the Inflation Reduction Act and how much better it's made our lives. You want us to talk about it? We will talk about it today. Plus, Flagstock. We all need a little bit of patriotism in our world. At UNC, a big concert, big bucks too, to help UNC students who protected America's flag. So we're going to be talking about all of this, plus a lot else, other things going on in North Carolina. Let's start with RFK. Brianna, what happened in court today?
Yes, so Kennedy's lawyers were in downtown Raleigh today, arguing that his name should be taken off the North Carolina ballot. The only problem is tomorrow, Friday, absentee ballots go out across North Carolina. So they were arguing that because he's no longer campaigning here in North Carolina, his name should be off the ballot. But the State Board of Elections denied that originally, so it went to court. And then ultimately this morning, the judge said that no, his name is going to stay on the ballot.
Okay, so now he's endorsed former President Trump, correct?
Yes, he is supporting him, backing him, but at the same time, in states that aren't swing states, he is okay with keeping his name on.
Sure.
So it's a little bit of varying by the state, and so that's what the defendants, the state argued, that this is inconsistent and it's too late, and lots of ballots have already been printed and they're ready to go out in the morning, so we need to leave it as it is.
Okay, so is there an appeal period?
So they have said they're going to immediately appeal, which they need to do today, Thursday. Okay. And so I think the judge has said 24 hours. They have to do that. So it's crunch time right now happening. And it depends still, and Mitch, maybe you'll know more about this, if the ballots can really start going out tomorrow.
Yeah, and in fact, I think one of the reasons that Judge Holt said you've got 24 hours is because they have that September 6th date to start sending the ballots out. So this has to be resolved fairly quickly, and she didn't want Kennedy's lawyers to sort of drag this out and take a few days to have an appeal and have everything be blocked between now and then. The interesting part about this dispute is a difference of opinion about what the law says on a candidate removing their name. Basically, Kennedy's argument is, if you look at state law, I have until September 6th to say take my name off the ballot, and if you don't take my name off the ballot, you are violating my right and basically giving me compelled speech saying that I am a candidate even though I am not a candidate anymore, and that's pretty clear in the state law. The State Board of Elections has argued in its court filings, and I'm guessing they probably did at the hearing as well, that no, it's not quite that simple. We're also dealing with some rules about when the ballots have to go out, and our consideration when we decide about whether you take your name off the ballot or not also has to deal with the implications if we do that. And the implications are that this would be a really high cost endeavor because all these ballots are already printed. We'd have to go back, take the time and the money to have new ballots with no Kennedy name on that. And as Brianna just mentioned, one of their arguments is, he's saying that he will suffer irreparable harm if his name isn't removed. But why in other states is he arguing that he would face irreparable harm if his name isn't on the ballot? And then it's an inconsistent argument. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens between now and the end of the day Friday.
Sure. So North Carolina, I believe, has the earliest period of absentee voting, and where the ballots go out earlier than anywhere else in the country. Do you think that this might end up popping up later down the road as a reason to not have ballots go out so early?
Potentially. I think there are a lot of people who would like to see some reforms that cut down on the length of time that we have for voting. But then you run up against the argument that, hey, you should give people as much opportunity as they want. I mean, back after early voting started, you remember there was a lot of debate about whether there should be early voting at all.
Sure.
And it proved to be so popular that the people who thought that there should only be election day voting unless you aren't in the state or in your precinct, that those people basically just sort of said, okay, we've lost that argument. Now it's really more about the limits. When is it too early to start, and when is it too late to count the ballots? You know that there's been a debate about whether the absentee mail-in ballots should count at any point beyond Election Day. The state law says now 7:30, or when the polls close on election night, that's as late as a mailed-in ballot can reach the elections board and still be counted. Whereas the old law was there was a 3-day grace period, and sometimes it ended up being more than 3 days.
Sure.
And so I think that's where that argument is now. We're not going to just go back to 1 day of voting,
Right.
but what are the outer limits of when you start and when you end? And maybe something like this tells the reformers that we should at least start it a little bit later, closer to Election Day.
Sure, sure. So Jeff, there is a political, an R&D kind of push and pull to this, because State Board of Elections initially fought having him on, and Democrat majority State Board of Elections, now they're fighting to keep him back on. What are your thoughts on this? 'Cause this does seem to have a partisan edge to it.
It's a little bit of a whipsaw, and if I'm a retail voter that's paying attention and there are media headlines about RFK fighting to get on the ballot,
Right.
and then I turn around, my kids start back to school, I look up again, and now RFK is in court to get his name off the ballot. So it can be a little bit confusing for retail voters. If they are interested in supporting RFK or not, they're probably paying a close enough attention to know the difference.
Sure.
And engaged voters on the Republican and the Democratic side probably paying enough attention to know the difference. But the proximity of okay, you can finally be on the ballot, to now you have to stay on the ballot, we can't let you off, is a very short timeline, but that's because there was a lot of delay in pushing the approval of his name on the ballot in the first place, because there was so much fighting, and that's where some critics have pointed to a partisan kind of bias there, because the Democrats that control the State Board of Elections that are voting on these things may have had an advantage in keeping him on or keeping him off.
Okay.
So it goes both ways, and now with some of the endorsements and how it mixes out and it changes in swing states who it really helps and who it hurts. But it'll be interesting to see. I think most engaged voters, if they find his name on that list, will be aware that he's not presently running and that he endorsed Trump. But you've got to wonder, I agree that this is the kind of thing that would give some impetus to push it back a little bit so you have time to clean these things up before you get to the point where you've printed thousands and thousands of ballots and now you have to go back and reprint.
Sure, sure. So right now, Trump's within the margin of error, a 1-point lead on Harris. Could RFK being on the ballot make a difference in the presidential election?
Yeah, when you have it that close, then if you have third-party candidates on there that typically soak up just very small amounts, percentages, but it could be a half point or a point, and that could make a difference. So in a state like North Carolina, if it is indeed that close and it comes down to it on Election Day, having his name on the ballot could make a difference.
Yeah.
And remember that even people who know that he's no longer actively running might cast a vote for him as a protest vote and say, I don't like Donald Trump, I don't like Kamala Harris, I kind of like RFK, I know he's not running, but I think he should be the one to be the president. And if enough people do that, if they would otherwise vote for Donald Trump, that's good news for Kamala Harris. If they otherwise would vote for Vice President Harris, that would be good news for Trump. I think the current thinking is that RFK Jr. is taking more votes away now from Trump than from Harris, which is why Democrats seem to like the idea of keeping him on the ballot, and Republicans seem to like the idea of getting him off the ballot.
Very interesting. All right. Anything else we should be watching for? You're going to have a great story up on CarolinaJournal.com today, and we'll keep you updated with the appeal process tomorrow.
Well, it's just interesting that it's done a 180, really, from thinking originally that it was going to be taking votes away from Democrats, and now trying to get his name off because it might be taking votes away from Republicans. So.
Sure.
Yeah, because remember, the Elections Board, although there was a dispute about it, put RFK on the ballot. It's not like Cornel West where they denied it. They actually put the We the People Party, the RFK Party, on the ballot. It was the Democratic Party that sued to try to get him off the ballot, and they lost. So he stayed on the ballot. But now that he's trying to get his name off the ballot, you're not hearing anything from the Democrats who wanted to get him off the ballot. And the main lawyer who was arguing to help him get his name off the ballot is a lawyer who almost always represents Republicans in these types of lawsuits.
All right, we're going to be following that really closely. All right, we're going to go on actually to here in Wake County. Janet Yellen is in town. She is talking up the Inflation Reduction Act, saying how much better off we are because of it, and all these green jobs. They really want the media to be talking about it. So let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Jeff, tell me what you heard in her comments today.
Yeah, so Treasury Secretary Yellen, she's a prominent
Sure.
economic mind in the administration. Obviously, served as a Federal Reserve Chair. Before that, was head of the Council on Economic Advisors. Now
Sure.
she's Treasury Secretary. She's got a lot of bona fides when it comes to the economy. So she comes here today to highlight in Raleigh at Wake Technical Community College, Wake Tech, to highlight the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act on North Carolina. And in so doing, they talked almost exclusively about all the green energy, clean energy initiatives that they funded through that. If you'll remember, they sold the Inflation Reduction Act as a means to reduce costs, obviously. And after it passed the finish line and Biden signed it, all of the climate change advocates, or not advocates, fighters,
Yeah.
We're celebrating the largest outlay for climate
Sure.
green initiatives in U.S. history. I think it was close to $370 billion for these kind of things. So Yellen is here today talking about some of those subsidies and tax credits at Wake Tech. They have a new electric vehicle charging training program that they've initiated there. Roy Cooper and some Congress members, Deborah Ross and Wiley Nickel, were also there touting all of that. But the interesting things about some of it are that we know as we shop around that the Inflation Reduction Act has not done much to reduce any of these
No.
prices. And they tout reductions in the rate of inflation, but that still means that prices are going up. So
Sure.
some of the headlining things they talked about, the EV charging stations, that's caught criticism recently because I think it's tens of billions of dollars
Yeah.
they've outlaid. I think they've done 6 or 7 charging stations across the country in the last couple of years.
$7.5 billion for
Yeah.
EV charging stations, and they've got 7.
7 across the
Plus,
country.
they're training thousands and thousands of kids here in North Carolina to maintain them.
Yeah, and so
none
that's
of them are
obviously not
Yeah.
a success as we would look at it. And then what are those doing, those kind of investments? What kind of investments are they pushing out of the way that would make costs a little bit more manageable for
Right.
the families here in North Carolina? When they talk about energy costs during this meeting and how they're doing a lot to bring energy costs down, but through the IRA and all of the green initiatives, they're investing in a lot of things that typically drive energy costs up. Across the Biden administration here in North Carolina, from January of 21 to about March of 24, our residential electric rates from Duke Energy went up about 50%. So since the Inflation Reduction Act in the August of 2022, it's up about 31% or so. So the Inflation Reduction Act, if it is focusing on, among other things, reducing energy costs by investing in clean energy solutions, it has not had the effect that you would hope it would if you're
Sure.
a consumer of these kind of things that you have to pay for. But nonetheless, the administration is out here touting the success of this, kind of maybe trying to speak it into in existence, that their economic agenda has been a success and that we're lowering costs. At the same time, they always sort of acknowledge that even though we've done all this good work, we acknowledge that the prices at the grocery store and healthcare and everywhere else, housing, are far too high. So we're going to keep doing more of these things.
I'm always suspect when somebody says we're investing.
Yeah,
not
yeah.
spending.
Yeah, it's a buzzword for sure, and you'll see it on both sides.
Sure.
Anytime there's an investment, you can bet that it's something that a policy they favor, that they're going to take a whole lot of tax money to fund. And so these
Sure.
investments in our clean energy future seem to be investments in our our power bills, our
Yeah.
energy bills going up.
Right.
So I'm unsure how that's going to be received, but with the way that they've been able to manage narratives across kind of national media and within the state media complex here, they may have people that are biting on that. I think most people, when they see Janet Yellen saying the Biden-Harris administration has done so much to lower costs
Right.
for American families, are going to have a wrinkled question mark on their face about
Sure.
where those costs are that are lowering because they haven't run into them.
Right. I mean, I want to hear about interest rates from Janet Yellen. I'm not sure I want to hear about EV chargers. What do you think?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting ploy from the Biden-Harris administration. Obviously, you don't send Janet Yellen to North Carolina to talk about this stuff unless you're trying to influence the election and try to get people to say, oh, the Biden-Harris administration's been great. We ought to elect Kamala Harris, have North Carolina send its electoral votes to Democrats for the first time since 2008. But my guess is that most people are not going to pay much attention to this at all. And if they think of anything about the Biden-Harris administration and their impact on prices, it'll be along the lines of that ad that Donald Trump is running right now, where he has Kamala Harris saying, food prices are up, these prices are up, and then she says, it's Bidenomics, and we think it's great. And then go back and forth between talking about how bad things are and then having her smiling and laughing about how great Bidenomics is. My guess is that message is much more effective than having Janet Yellen sit there and talk about EV charges and green energy.
Sure, sure. Well, something that the John Locke Foundation has been talking about for a long time is, taxpayer-funded incentives.
Right.
In this case, for EV manufacturing. One of the things that kind of caught my attention this week was that a foreign EV automaker called Stellantis, they make Ram and Jeep, whatever. They took hundreds of millions of dollars in incentives through, I believe, the Inflation Reduction Act for EV manufacturing, but then just laid off 2,000 people in Michigan.
Yeah, that's been commonplace with incentives. I mean, targeted incentives for a particular business or a particular industry are always bad. Let the economy do what it's going to do. Government should just have lower taxes, less regulation, and then let the businesses do what they do best, which is invest and which is real investment because it's private people's money you take from taxpayers without their consent, really. And so all of these deals are bad, but some of these are worse than others because you end up giving hundreds of millions of dollars to a company that ends up never producing a job, or it produces a job in one place where you gave them the money and takes away the jobs elsewhere. Or we once saw in North Carolina that we gave tax incentives to a tire company just so it wouldn't get rid of jobs.
Right.
And so all of this is a mess. We need to get rid of these targeted tax incentives. I think the Carolina Journal just had a column this week about how it would be great to have some sort of compact among states or at the federal level saying we're not going to do this mess anymore because it's a race to the bottom. Either a company doesn't need the incentive and so you shouldn't give it to them, or they do need the incentive to survive, which also means you shouldn't give it to them because they can't survive without an incentive. It's just a bad deal all the way around.
Right, right. There's been a lot of green energy focus with incentives and with tax rebates. Tax rebates are still money. I mean, that's still money that would come to the government. Tell me a little bit about what a free market means in this era of high incentives, high rebates, high credits, that kind of thing.
Well, the free market would be just the government gets out of those decision-making processes. The incentives game is all about the government picking winners and losers. You don't want that. What you want is to have the government set sort of a level playing field saying, okay, here's what our tax rate's going to be for everyone. Here's what the regulatory burden is going to be for everyone. And now let the market actors do what they do best. What has happened with all of these programs is the government is choosing either a particular company, in the case of the targeted tax incentives, or a particular industry like EVs or green energy or solar or wind, where they say, this is so important that we're going to take tax dollars and devote it to this issue, or we're going to give these people who are in these industries particular breaks that everyone else has to pay for. And that ends up skewing the economy in ways that only come to light years later when people see, oh, our economy has become more sluggish, or it's slowed down, or it hasn't grown as fast as it would have because the government said we're going to do this, when they should have just stepped back and said, let's let things work themselves out on their own. When you're talking about these energy sources, basically your choice is the government choosing the winners and then hoping that they're right, or you just get the government out of the way and the solar, the wind, the electric vehicles, all those people will have to compete with everyone else, and they'll make their products better and less expensive on their own, and that's how they will end up competing. If the government props them up, then you're basically just saying, okay, taxpayers, you're going to help this business survive for a while, and we hope that it will eventually survive on its own, but most likely it's going to get enticed to live off incentives until that game runs out, and then it'll go away.
Right. Econ 101. Yeah, of course. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I wrote the column on the compact.
Yeah.
And think this is, especially when it comes to the climate change, the green energy space, this has been something that they've pushed very heavily on. I'm old enough to remember a company called Solyndra during the Obama administration that was famous for getting a very big pot of money and to do absolutely nothing with it.
Right.
And so it was an iconic example of waste when you do things like this. And states and regions within states sometimes engage in this kind of activity all of the time. All of the data suggests that it doesn't actually work. It doesn't filter down to the bottom line as far as tax revenues or jobs, and certainly doesn't help when it comes to the equal treatment of all the people in your state. If you're giving a targeted tax incentive to a company to move into the state, what is your argument that that is not a tax setup that the residents of your state there already that they should also have?
Sure.
I don't see the argument against that. So if it's good enough for the goose, it should be good enough for the gander. So this kind of stuff happens all over the place. North Carolina is about in the middle of the pack as far as the corporate welfare scene goes, but it doesn't mean that each and every tax dollar that's dedicated to things like that isn't a tax dollar wasted that could be sent to better areas.
Sure.
With Yellen here, they highlight a lot of these kind of really glaring examples of what you throw, and when we're talking federal dollars, they are obscene amounts. A $42 billion program to connect people to high-speed internet.
Yeah.
I think it was signed by Biden
like 2 years ago.
2 years ago. Yeah. It reportedly, as of June, had not connected a single household to high-speed internet.
Not one.
Not one. Now that's the reporting as of June. Maybe those headlines actually spurred them to connect the routers on a few houses
Fiber
already.
went through my neighborhood in maybe a week.
Yeah, and Cooper was there at this event with Yellen today, and that's one of the things he was highlighting was his partnership with the Biden-Harris administration in getting high-speed internet to homes across North Carolina, especially in the rural areas. There's been some focus on that here in North Carolina, of getting all these people connected. It's always through these kind of subsidization and credit programs that don't seem to have a very good track record of deploying our tax dollars in an efficient way.
Sure.
It's important to note that there are a lot of good things about lowering overall tax rates, but one of the best things about them is the lower your tax rate, the less inclined you are to have these special giveaways.
Yes.
That was one of the old problems with our corporate tax rate, is North Carolina had an especially high corporate tax rate compared to other states. But then what government did was go to companies and say, yeah, we've got a high corporate tax rate, but we'll give you a special deal because we like you. We think you're a good company. If
It's
the
like
tax
a VIP room of taxes.
That's right. If the tax rate is low enough for everyone, there's less incentive for anyone to want to get a special deal.
Sure, sure. All right. Speaking of government overreach, there is a case this week about masking. Tell me what happened in that case.
So, believe it or not, this is a case from 2022. Okay. It's not 2020 when we were dealing with the issues of COVID-19 everywhere and the elections shut down. This was 2 years later, 2022, in Harnett County. Prospective juror shows up for jury duty. He's not wearing a mask. He's going to where he's supposed to go, and some court employee said, hey, you're supposed to wear a mask, and he said, well, I'm not going to wear a mask. So the employee took this guy up in front of a judge who said, well, you're supposed to wear a mask, and he said, well, I'm sorry, sir, I'm not going to wear a mask. And he said, well, yeah, you've got to wear a mask. He said, well, I'm not going to wear a mask. And after 2 or 3 times of this, the judge held him in contempt, sent him to jail for a day.
What?
So now, 2 years later, the Court of Appeals said, no, there was no reason for that contempt conviction. It was thrown out. Basically, the Court of Appeals opinion, and there were 2 different opinions. One was the majority opinion by Michael Stadding, and then Jefferson Griffin, who was running for state Supreme Court, wrote a concurring opinion, and both of them basically said the judge had no reason to do this. One of the things was that the guy was not disrupting anything. Basically, if no one had said anything to him, there would not have been any problem, would not have gone before this judge.
And there was not a mask mandate at the time of any sort.
There were local rules, but that's one of the other things, is that the reason that the county was able supposedly to have this mask mandate was based on some rules that had been in place in the early days of the pandemic.
Okay.
But Chief Justice Paul Newby, who oversees the court system, had rescinded anything to do with emergency COVID issues in 2021.
Okay.
So this is well over more than a year after Chief Justice Newby said no more COVID restrictions were done. And still in this at least one county
Sure.
courthouse, they were having mask mandates for jurors. And this one fellow ran into this buzzsaw of a judge who wanted to say, well, you're not going to listen to me, I'm going to throw you in jail for contempt. And so now the Court of Appeals said no, there was no basis for that. It not only threw out the case for this one person, but said it's disturbing that the local courthouse was using long expired emergency authorization from Chief Justice Newby to justify this 2 years after the heart of the pandemic.
Sure, very interesting. All right. Now, as we wrap up, this past Labor Day, Flagstock in Chapel Hill. This was so heartwarming to me, and it's interesting because I've spoken to some students who've been on campus, and they're not quite as impressed as the rest of us about what happened. But, you know, the students at UNC Chapel Hill who protected the flag from being taken down, touching the ground, desecrated, whatever was going to happen at the anti-Israel protests back in the fall, they've really gotten some recognition. Brianna, you were able to go to Flagstock. Tell me what happened and how it all came together.
Yes, they got their Labor Day party. So
Okay.
it was a big celebration on Monday night. Lee Greenwood and John Rich and some other country singers showed up in Chapel Hill to throw them a party like they promised. So they bussed them in from campus because they didn't want to have it on campus. So they actually had it at the American Legion about 15 minutes away.
Okay.
And it was a huge concert set up. There were food trucks and
how fun.
the guys could get beer, they could play beer pong, and it was just a big celebration, everybody together, having a good time. So it was kind of a special recognition for them after standing up to an intimidating crowd to hold up the American
Sure.
flag.
That does take a tremendous amount of courage, especially on a campus like Chapel Hill where they really had more protesters than them, certainly.
Absolutely. When you're surrounded by people that don't agree with you, to take a stand like that, you don't know what you're risking, your safety, or who knows what could have come that day on campus. So they got a reward for it. John Rich is the one who originally stepped forward and said, I would love to host these boys a party. And then the GoFundMe raised over $500,000 for them. So they used a significant amount of that money, but any leftovers at the end of it, they'll end up donating to some charitable causes. But a lot of the people came together and donated. The stage was like pro bono, like the stage crew and a lot of the people kind of contributed, came together
Right.
to just celebrate and recognize these guys.
Very exciting. Great. Well, you can find out more information about Flagstock on carolinajournal.com, and I believe they have a website too, Flagstock.
Yes, they have a website you can go to and see all their sponsors and
Yeah,
I'm
of
sure any
course.
footage from
Do you
the
think
party.
this will be the last one? Are they going to keep doing it?
You know, a reporter did ask that.
Uh-huh.
Is there going to be a Flagstock 2025?
Right.
And as of now, no, but you know,
Yeah,
you
I
never
can
know
see
what
it.
could come.
I can see it taking over. I can see it
Definitely.
taking over. Your alma mater, right?
Yeah, I'm a UNC alum, so that's it's not the typical party you might find on campus there. With everybody, with all the stage equipment and security.
Sure.
It's spent like $80,000 on security.
There was a
I think.
lot of security.
Oh, really?
'cause-
Yeah,
yeah.
so they wanted to make sure. I mean, this was an event born of a big protest and conflict among people. So you get security, and you don't let
Sure.
everyone know where it's going to be.
That was the other
until
thing.
just
I didn't hear a
before.
lot of media about this. Do you think that's why?
Yes, the day of is when later in the day, they said where the location was. So they were keeping it private
Oh,
all the way up
interesting.
to
It's like
that
when
day.
Harris comes to North Carolina and they keep the location secret until about an hour before,
Right.
so the reporters can't quite get
Right,
there.
right, exactly. Very interesting. Your alma mater too.
Yes, and to me, one of the more interesting things about the coverage about this was sometimes we hear the debates about crowd sizes. We know
Sure.
that's been something that Donald Trump gets all excited
Yeah.
about. And there were some people poo-pooing the fact that there were several hundred people and not thousands of people at this event. But really, the concert was designed for those dozens,
Yeah,
maybe,
that's
of
exactly
students
right.
who were actually involved in this. Anyone else who was who got involved and got the free party was a hanger-on for the
Sure.
people who actually did the work of protecting that flag. And also, you know, that's not why they didn't do this to have a party.
Yeah.
It's just some people saw what they did, thought it was such a great thing that they wanted to throw him a party. And so the fact that several hundred people said, okay, yeah, and took part in it, I think is great. And those who say, I don't know that we should be celebrating this, well, celebrate what the actions of the kids.
Sure.
Whether you think the party was a good idea or not, the fact that these students, these fraternity members, decided to defend the American flag is worthy of recognition. And obviously all of the organizers and people who put $500,000 into GoFundMe all thought that was a good idea.
Absolutely. All right. Well, good. Thank you so much for joining us on the Debrief. We'll see you soon.